Imagine for a moment a boy with a dream, a vision he wants to show the world, a story just like those that inspired him. The chance of a lifetime shows itself, a film festival. This student studied hard, learning all the techniques, but as hard as he tried, his submissions were flat and often rejected. Wallowing in despair, the student was about to give up, but he found an ancient book that showed him techniques that he had not yet thought of. The day came for the film festival, and the crowd was in awe of what he had created. And that brings me to the topic of today's video, in Cinematography of Manga. Let's get into it.
So hey there everyone, it's your boy Vandal, and I'm back with another video, and today we're going to get into the cinematics of manga, and we're going to be talking more about how to lay out and panel your mangas. But if it's your first time seeing me on this channel, my name is Vandal. I am a mangaka helping you make manga. So if you're interested in learning more about how to make your manga better, please like and subscribe down below. But let's get into it. So the first thing I want us to think about in the cinematics of manga, just like in movies, just like in films, anime, all of that good stuff, we want to think of our shot selection. Our shot selection is one of the most important things that will help dictate what we're going to do and how we're going to frame our manga. So we need to figure out what are those shot types. So let's get into the different shot types so you guys can get a bit of an understanding on how to make really good panels. But first we have to understand what type of shots we have. So the first shot that I want us to go with is the wide shot or the establishing shot. Usually these shots are like showing us the place where things are happening, or the background, or just the general staging or the setting of the story where it's going to take place. Usually this happens maybe at the beginning of the manga. It can be generally your first panel to give the readers an idea of, hey, this is where this is taking place. Maybe it's a city, maybe it's a town, maybe it's a village, but just to get an overall idea. So when we see certain things in the background later, it's going to make a lot more sense. The next type of shot that we're going to get into is the close-up shot. It's kind of almost like something that's just really focused on your head. You're just seeing what's going on with your character's face. It's great for showing emotions, intense like feelings. Maybe someone's angry, someone's really happy, or someone's shocked, or they even notice something. All of these things here can be used for the close-up shot. Now, each shot that I'm going to go through here, I'm going to show you in like a chart over here that's going to show you the varying sizes. We're going to go all the way from an extreme close-up, which would be like here, all the way to a full shot. So speaking of the extreme close-up, that is like just looking at the eyes. That's just something where you can see like someone's eyes changing, intensifying, all of those things to really show that deeper emotion. It's to also help give you a variance. All of these shots are to help you just vary how you're going to use them throughout your manga. But later on, we're gonna like put together how to lay these all out to make something a lot more interesting. The next shot is gonna be like the medium shot, or cut right up to even past here, past my shoulders, down to, I wanna say, the waist. So the medium shot, you can use that. And then also we have lastly is the full body shot. Each of these shots have different uses, so you can vary up like what you're trying to do. All of this is about variance, and I'm gonna talk a little bit more about that later because I think that's very important. But the medium shot you can use when you wanna show more of the characters using their arm. And then the full body shot is really good when you wanna just showcase all of their design, or you feel like this is like a nice way to do a character introduction. I like doing this in my manga Besiege. I use it a couple of times throughout the manga to introduce a character. I might not go all the way with the full body, but I'd say using it sparingly when you're introducing a character is a really good way to accentuate who they are, what they have, and a good way to introduce them. Now, for the most part, I'm going to keep it to these shot selections because I think they are the most easiest to use, and I don't want to overcomplicate anything. And I'll talk more about like some of the more complicated shots later in the video, but let's get into the next part. So now we're going to get into the layout section. Now I have another video that I've talked about how to storyboard your manga, which you can check out right here. It's a very good video if you want to go more into paneling as well, but also looking at layout. It's like a nice supplementary material that you can use to add on to this paneling part. So with your layout, we have three different types of four-sided shapes that we're going to use. I want to be very specific about this because depending on how your four-sided shape is, it's going to dictate how it fits in the page. So normally we'll have like a regular square, then we can have a rectangle, which can either be a horizontally long rectangle or a vertically long one. So, and they are varying degrees of size, so they can be all the way to the ends of your page, or they can fit within the confines and be a little bit smaller as we panel our way down. I would say stick with these three as your basic ones, and in each of these you can use a variance of the different styles that we talked about in the shot types. So if you want to do a close-up, you can do a close-up in a regular square, or you can do it in a long horizon panel. It's up to you. So different panels can call for different things. Now the next part is, of course, the next question that comes up is, where do you use these kinds of panels? How do you create what shots go where? Now, what I think is that it's kind of up to you. You need to know what's going on in your scene. You need to figure out what type of emotions you're trying to tell. For example, if somebody's feeling like some really intense emotion and you really want to show their details, you might use a small square close-up shot to show, oh, this is what's going on with their face. Whereas you wouldn't want to show it like something really far away with maybe like an establishing shot or a wide shot where you can see the character kind of, but you're not sure, are they mad or are they not? You want that clarity, so we're gonna create the bounds where in which you can have a smaller square that everyone can see what's going on inside of it. Now, one thing that I think is also important that I talked about earlier is that the reason why we have these different types of size, shapes, and squares is that you don't want your manga really to just be one square or one rectangle going all the way down. There are times where you can do that, where it'll be useful, but generally you want to vary it through your manga, because in the next part we're going to talk about later, flow, we want everyone to get down the page, but we don't want them to get bored seeing the same panel. Because in each panel, we're trying to dictate the reader's times. How much time do they spend on each panel making their way down to the end of the page? So with variants, they don't get bored seeing the same panel over and over and over again, or at least the same panel shape. But this can work to the effect of maybe you're making a gag manga, and that might be a little bit different because the rules change there. But generally, you would like to change it a little bit so people can be interested as they're reading down the course of your page. Another place you'd see like comics kind of the same is like in a comic strip. They tend to be very similar because one thing is just happening. It's a sequence of events, but the sequence of events are building to a punchline, and you want to keep it kind of flat. You don't need it to change too much because one, it's not too long, and then two, you don't need much variance because there's not much going on since it's not that long. When you're thinking about variance, think about how when you're compiling all of the panels and you're trying to get your reader down to the end of the page, how you can do that in the most interesting way possible. And when you have, for example, two pages facing each other, don't try and make them look exactly the same. Try and vary them up as different as you can. Maybe use less panels on one page, maybe use more on another. Try and figure out a way to get that flow going. Now, this is the one where people love to go a little bit wild. I think one thing that's kind of funny, if you look at the movie Hitch, I want to put the clip here, but I don't know if I'm going to get like tagged for it. So what I'm going to say is don't lose it with trying to break conventions with your paneling. Try and keep it generally the same like we talked about above. There are times where you can break it. There's times that I've broken it. I can think recently within my Besiege manga, there are certain times where I maybe slanted some of my panels, or I even did a few panel breaks. And that's something you can do too. You can do panel breaks and you can do spread pages. Those are some things that we're going to talk about a little bit later. That's going to add to the cinematism. I don't know if that's a word. But the cinematics of your manga and making it a little bit different and varying just the regular rectangular or square panel layout. And the reason why I say don't try and break convention too much is because you should use it sparingly throughout your manga. Use it at points where you'll think it'll be the most interesting, or there's like a narrative reason to use it. Using it for the sake of using it all of the time just to say that your whole manga is breaking convention, I don't think actually is breaking convention. In fact, I don't know what that is, but as a reader, it's going to be a lot harder for you to digest what's going on because you're not sure where to start or even where it begins, ends, all of that good stuff. So try and keep to that, but know that there are a few places where you can break the rule, and when you do, make sure it's impactful. Now, one of the most things I'm actually really excited to talk about is flow. Flow is something that's talked about in many sports manga if you ever watched it. It's basically just being in a trance. Have you ever read like a manga and then you've seen where you just read a manga and sometimes it may be 200 pages, but it may have felt like 100, maybe even 50. Whatever it is, the manga feels really short, and there's a reason to that, and that's because of flow. Flow allows the reader to get through the manga as fast as possible. There's nothing to bug them down. And the biggest thing, I have to put this here, this is actually not one of my tips, but one of the tips I'm thinking about right now, is that when you are creating your manga, in the first parts of your manga, in the first chapter specifically, you don't want to take your reader's time putting too much exposition, too much writing, too many words. You need them to get invested in the story early on. So the flow in your manga in the beginning needs to be really quick. It needs to be fast and get them through the story to where they need to be, and to get the reader to care enough to read all of that subtext later. Because whatever you said in the beginning can be shown later in the manga. It doesn't need to all be put there. Because if you put it all then, there, and now to explain context of things that will happen later on, no one cares yet. So that's gonna really break your flow. So if that was the first thing I was gonna say, please make sure when you're thinking about the flow of your manga, in the beginning, try and get everyone into your manga first. Let them open the door before they close it on you. And then that comes with, back to what we were talking about in the last part, panel optimization. We wanna think about how to better optimize our panels, because we want to make sure that we're not just putting everything willy-nilly. Sometimes I would recommend reading other manga, see how they do their panel flow. But the way I like to look at it is you look at your script, and if you're interested on how to write scripts, you can check out this video right here. But you can think about using your script and what emotions are going into your shot selections. Different shots have different emotions. Having the camera look down at a character or looking up at a character will evoke different emotions inside of that paneling, and figuring out what those are in the scenes that you're trying to convey. So figure out those, and you'll figure out how to size and shape your panels as you're going down. The other thing that I would say in panel optimization too, and I've said it in other videos, is try to keep your panels anywhere between maybe 5 to 7 panels. I think 7 is the sweet spot of like the maximum, and 5 is like the minimum, but sometimes you can go less. Less also is more when you're making manga. The other thing that is going to affect all of your flow, and we actually talked about it in the beginning, is the word bubble placement. This is actually the most integral part, because the art is not the only thing that's going to exist in your manga. There's going to be words, and those words are important because bubble placement matters, and the art matters as well. So when we're looking at art, we can look at it in the shape of a Z going down the page. And what we want to look at particularly is how the artwork is directing you to read the next word bubble. Maybe the character's eyes is looking to the left or the right or up and down, and how the next bubble will make you go to the next panel inside of the manga. And how fast that happens is dependent on maybe how many words there are, or how long the reader takes to look at the artwork that's being described with what's being said in the word bubble. But the word bubble placement is very important, because when you're thinking maybe you want someone to read up and then come down, 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 and up, you want to make sure that you're placing your word bubbles in such a way the reader knows where they need to go next. Whether you're going from left to right or right to left, they know that the position of the bubble is guiding them towards the end of the page. Sometimes even putting your last bubble on the bottom left or right of the page will help them understand that, hey, this is how I get to the end, to flip the page, because that's what your goal is as a manga writer and creator. You want them to flip that page. Next, what you want to do in that is framing. So we talked a little bit about like the bubble positioning. You want to think of like the composition of your manga and how you are placing your word bubbles. How are they put in such a way that they create that flow that gets the reader to the bottom of the page? It's something that's very important when you're thinking of your composition. When you're in your drafting phase and making like the storyboards for your manga, you want to think about that very importantly. Where those word bubbles go matter. Because if you just draw the art, for instance, and you have the script and you know exactly what's happening and you know what's going to be said, but you don't place it, when it's time to draw the art, it's going to look wonky. It's happened to me like a few times while I was drawing Note and Besieger. There are a few times in the first stages where it just didn't make sense where the art was going to be, or how I wanted the art in the script versus like where the paneling for the bubble was going to happen. It didn't make sense at all. So you want to think about that as you're framing and compositing, creating the composition for your manga. Now, in the other part of flow, we want to create buildup. So when you're writing your script, think about like the nice cutoffs at the end of the page. What can you do at the end of your page that would make your reader want to go to the next page? What's the last thing that you can leave off on that will make, hey, I think I need to go to the next page. Hey, I need to go to the next page. Each of those things will help you organize and better structure and build up that tension. Kind of like, oh, this is really cool. What's the next mystery? What's the next mystery? And you find yourself just reading more. I think that's what happens with flow. You just end up reading more and more because the writer and artist have done a really good job of guiding you through the manga and making you want to read more due to what's being said and what's being shown. And I think that's like a nice summation of flow. It's a good way for you to get that reader wanting to just read more, because honestly, the time I take between like looking through the actual pictures of a manga and reading the words are kind of like, maybe I feel like I spend 75% on reading the words and maybe like another 25% or so just looking at the pictures. Like I'll take a glance, but honestly the artist has probably spent like hours or days on this picture, but the words is like what's driving me a little bit more, and just the way they've laid out everything. Now we're coming to the last part and we're thinking about the cinematics. When I say cinematics, I think looking at movies will give you a good idea about how to use some of those techniques inside of your own manga to make things interesting. So like, for example, like when you're building a sequence out, maybe you have two characters talking to each other inside of a club room, and I'm going to use my manga as an example. Maybe you have them talking to each other. How can you make that the most interesting? There are different types of shots. You can have two characters talking to each other side by side. You can have one character looking over the other character. Maybe their back is towards the camera, but we're looking over at what someone else is saying. We can have maybe multiple characters in a frame. They're all saying things. All of these things will make it a lot more interesting and our eyes a little bit more interested in what's going on, because those do definitely translate into your manga. So I would say look at a couple of movies. Also Google a couple of other different types of like film shots, like over the shoulder, by the hip, when you put the foot down, when a character puts their foot down, you know, like they put their foot down, boom. And that is an interesting thing, because you can even see in that point where when a character puts their foot down, you know that it's about to go down. Yeah, I said that. Okay, but anyways, you get it. You get it, kind of like that's what you do when you're trying to build a sequence. You're trying to figure out how to get the reader to get involved in the scene that you're creating using the shots that you have pre-existing in your head. And if you have more of those in your head and you have a better understanding of how to put that into your manga, it'll make things more interesting. Now, let's think about things that might be a little bit more central to comic books and manga. So one of the things that'll happen, and it can't really happen in movies and cinema like that, is panel breaking. So it's kind of like almost maybe when you're in a movie theater and there's like a 3D effect and something's coming at you. But in this sense, it's when maybe a character's outside of a panel or going through a panel. You can use that maybe with action shots. You can have a character maybe close up shots. So actually, this is actually a nice point. Thinking about like how you can combine shots, the combinations of this. Maybe you can have a wide angle shot of your character somewhere, and then you can have a half midway shot of them with a close-up panel break, showing them maybe their emotions that you can't see in the wide shot a little bit close up, and vice versa, giving that nice little contrast of like, oh, this is what they're actually thinking or doing, and helping that guide into the flow. Maybe you're trying to get your reader to get down the page as well. Combining different shots will help as well as this. All right, let's rewind it and let's go back to panel breaks. So panel breaks is where you have your character maybe extend some part of their body outside of the panel. And what that does really is it helps guide with flow. Maybe you want to direct the reader's eye somewhere. Maybe you want to show a little bit more action. Maybe you want to have them show movement. There are different things that you can use panel breaks for. I would say don't use it all the time, but definitely use it a little bit more where you can, where you think it'll be more interesting and it'll aid in flow. All of this is in the effort to create the best flow for your manga. Now, the next thing that I think is really cool, and I don't even know if there's, I guess you could say it's like a wide shot, but in manga is like a splash page or a spread page where both pages are just one long seamless part of art. Now, there are different ways that you can do this. You can do it in a rule of thirds, where maybe 3/4 of the page is just the art, and then maybe another 1/4 is just maybe a few panels, or you can have like a section of it be a lot of the art and then have the panels underneath guide it. I think this is a little bit tricky because sometimes what can happen in spread pages or splash pages that you're not sure where to start reading, the flow can get a little bit messy. So trying to do your best to be as concise or thoughtful about like where you're placing what and how you're doing your art is very important. The other type of panel that comes into this too, now that I'm talking about splash pages, is pages that don't have any panels, or it can either be a full page or it can be a panelless panel, where it's like you can use other panels to frame that panel. Maybe you want the character to be free, maybe you don't want the character to be bound by things, and then maybe in the full-on page there's something that's insane going on that doesn't need 2 pages, but as itself as 1 page is something, maybe there's 3 pages. So you have 1 page where something happens, another thing is building to that action, and then you turn to the 3rd page and it's like, oh my god! Like, so when you're thinking about the uses of that, you're always trying to figure out how can you use these tools that you have in your paneling game to make interesting pages that the reader will be like, oh, that's pretty cool. The next part is actually probably the most difficult part, I would say, to all of this, and that is perspective. A lot of this will need you to learn how to do perspective. I do want to make a video about that. Please like and comment down below if you're interested in something like that, because with perspective, you want to learn different angles, because like we talked about earlier in your shot selections, maybe having a bird's eye view or a bottoms up view will help your characters look a little bit more dynamic. It'll be a little bit more interesting and telling into maybe the expressions that they could make or the situations that they're in. So learning maybe 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, 4 point, 5 point perspective, learning all of those perspectives will better help your toolkit in ways that you can lay out your panels and figure out how you can make this small little square or long rectangle really interesting to the reader. Perspective is going to help your shot selection vary widely. Sometimes you can even have those cool like warped shots where someone's just like, I can't believe my family died, but it's something that's like very interesting to the reader because it shows, 1, your artistic skill, and 2, something deep that's happening with the character that's not by normal conventions, and it helps your artwork from becoming flat. We really don't want to have anything flat. So perspective is going to help you at least make your world feel more modular and more whole. So learning perspective is definitely on the list. Please put that as something to help the cinematics of everything. So let's go back through it again. What we need to do is we need to look at our shot selection. We need to pick various different types of shots, whether it's an extreme close-up to a full body, and vary those so we can figure out ways to make our manga more interesting. 1. 2, we need to think about different types of panels we're using, whether we're using a small square, long rectangle, vertical or horizontal, and what type of widths or sizes that we're going to vary them through the whole entire manga, and how we can keep each page looking different from the last, but also keeping it interesting as well, and also how we can build that up to something that's interesting. How can we next, in part 3, create more flow, creating flow throughout our manga as we work with our speech bubbles, our onomatopoeia, which I didn't get to talk too much about, but that's also playing a role in it as well. And also, how can we frame our different scenes to build up to something that's a little bit more interesting to the end of our story. And then lastly, how we can use our cinematic angles, different types of perspectives, using our panel breaks and our spread pages to make certain pages a little bit more interesting. And I say all of this to say that all of these things that may be special, like the panel breaks or the spread pages, use those sparingly and with intentionality so they're the most hype, interesting moments in your manga. If every page is a spread page, then no page is a spread page. I feel like that should go like in a manga tone book. Like, it's kind of nice. Anyway, but I think those are like the 4 takeaways that we can take away from how to make your manga more cinematic. I want to go more into that. If you guys think I missed anything, or you want to know more about making manga, or think about another topic I didn't touch on this, please put that in the comment section down below. But that's all I have for you today, guys. So don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and then hit that bell for notifications when you want to hear things that I have to say. But for now, I'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace, boys.